Rancher saved the young native girl from whipping. Next day, she undressed in his cabin, asking tobehis. The sun hung low over Dusthorn as the townsfolk gathered on Main Street. Heat shimmered off the dirt road, boots shuffled, and whispers passed like dry wind through tall grass. A wooden post stood in the square, and tied to it was a girl, no older than 17, her wrists bound, her long black hair tangled over her face, hiding the shame that had become her only cloak. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. Not after an hour under the eyes of the sheriff, the preacher, and the storewomen with their stiff bonnets and even stiffer judgment. A rough sign hung around her neck. Thief. It was nailed crookedly, cruelly, as if even mercy had been denied her. "I say she stole that bread," barked an old man near the saloon. "Savages don't know no better." Someone laughed. A boy threw a stone. It struck her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. Only her breathing changed, shallow and fast, like a bird too long caged. The sheriff turned to the crowd. 10 lashes before sundown, unless someone steps in and pays for her crime." No one moved. Then came the sound of boots, slow, heavy, certain. A man emerged from the shadow of the general store, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and silence. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the girl, then at the sheriff. "I'll pay," he said. His voice was low, like it came from the ground itself. "Let her go." Murmurs rippled, eyes shifted, but no one dared argue. The girl looked up, eyes wide. For the first time all day her lips parted, though no words came. The man untied her hands himself. The sign dropped to the dirt. She was free. But now, so terribly lost. Her name was Luma, though few in Dusthorn cared to know it. She had come from the northern ridge, where pines stood taller than men, and silence was a friend. Her mother had died in the last snow, her body curled around a sick baby who didn't live through the night. Her father, once a hunter of elk, had vanished into the mountains after the raids took his pride and half his leg. He never returned. Luma had walked south with nothing but a sack of roots and her mother's necklace tucked in a cloth. Dusthorn had seemed quiet, warmer, maybe even kind. But kindness was the first thing to vanish when her face was seen, when her bare feet touched the church steps, and when she offered to trade berries for bread. The accusation of theft had come easily. No one had asked questions. They never do when it's a native girl with hollow cheeks and no man to speak for her. That morning, before the sheriff caught her, Luma had watched the bakery window fog from the inside. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She waited for the baker's boy to turn his back. The bread was still warm when she took it. She had meant to pay, in berries, in work, in anything, but they had grabbed her by the hair before she reached the corner. Now, sitting in the shade behind the general store, her wrists raw and her legs shaking, she stared at the stranger who had paid for her freedom. He hadn't spoken since. She didn't understand why he helped her. People like him didn't help girls like her. But even now, as bruises formed and shame rose in her throat like fire, she sat straight. She did not cry, not here, not again. She wasn't strong because she wanted to be. She was strong because no one had ever given her another choice. The townsfolk called her thief, stranger, savage. She called herself Luma. And though the world felt wide and cruel, she had not let it kill her yet. She still breathed, and breathing for her was still defiance. The rancher's name was Eli Ward. Folks in Dusthorn didn't know much about him, only that he kept to himself and ran cattle on the edge of Now, here, where the land met the hills and the wind never stopped moving. His house was plain, his barn well kept, and his hands bore the marks of long, honest work. He came to town once a week, never stayed long, and never raised his voice. He had no wife, no kin in sight, and no habit of stepping into town business. But that day, when he saw the girl tied to the post with the word thief nailed across her chest, something stirred in him. Not pity, not outrage, just a quiet knowing, like he had seen this before and carried the weight of it inside him. Eli had known humiliation, not the kind spoken in whispers, but the kind that breaks a man without drawing blood. Years ago, in a different town, he had stood by while his brother was taken away in chains, wrongly accused, and never returned. Eli had learned since then that silence was a kind of wound, and sometimes the only way to heal it was to speak. That was why he stepped forward. Now, standing near his horse with the girl sitting against the store wall, he watched her without staring. He didn't ask her name. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply said, "You can ride back with me, if you need a place." His voice was steady, without question or demand. It was the kind of voice that made wolves pause and children sleep easy. Luma didn't answer at first, but she stood, barefoot and proud, despite the dust clinging to her skin. She nodded once. That was enough for him. As they rode out past the edge of Dusthorn, Eli didn't glance back. He knew what the town thought of him now. He didn't care. He hadn't done it for them. He had seen a girl left out in the open like a broken thing, and something in his chest refused to look away. He didn't save her. He offered her a place where she might save herself. The ride to the ranch was long and quiet. Eli didn't force words, and Luma didn't offer any. The sun dipped behind the hills by the time they reached the wooden gate. It creaked open with a gentle pull, revealing a modest house with a stone chimney and a field of swaying grass behind it. A thin curl of smoke rose from the barn, where an old mule brayed once and fell silent. Eli dismounted first, then he helped her down, careful not to touch her skin. She noticed that. He gestured toward the porch. "You can sleep inside. I'll stay in the barn tonight." Luma's eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in disbelief. She had expected suspicion, maybe control. Instead, she found distance, wrapped in respect. The next morning she woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Through the window she saw Eli in the yard, sleeves rolled, moving with the rhythm of a man who worked more than he spoke. She stepped out, unsure of where to stand. He didn't turn, just said, "Chop's almost done. Could use help stacking." She nodded and knelt, her fingers fumbling the first few logs. They tumbled once, twice, before she found a pattern. Eli watched quietly, not correcting, not judging. Later that day, as dusk colored the hills, he placed a small wrapped bundle on the porch beside her. Inside were gloves, old, patched, but clean. "They were my mother's," he said, almost shyly. "She was smaller than me. You might fit them." Luma ran her fingers over the stitching, soft, worn, kind. She didn't say thank you. She only pulled them on and went back to the woodpile. Something changed after that. She began sweeping the floor in the mornings. He left a fresh apple by her door each evening. They shared quiet dinners where only the fire crackled between them. There were no grand gestures, no sudden closeness, but respect had entered the space like a third person. It stood between them, steady and growing. He didn't look at her, like she was broken, and she stopped looking at herself that way. The days settled into a rhythm, but for Luma, each one felt like a test she had not prepared for. She knew how to gather roots, how to climb trees and track animals, but the ways of ranch life were strange and rigid. Everything had its place, its tool, its rhythm, and she didn't yet know the beat. The first time she tried to milk the old brown cow, the pail tipped, splashing milk across her skirt. Eli had seen it from the barn door. He didn't laugh. He didn't scold. He just stepped forward, kneeled beside her and said, "Try it like this." His hands moved slowly, guiding the rhythm without touching hers. Then he stood and left, leaving her to finish. Another morning, she dropped an egg basket on the steps. The shells shattered like her pride, and she knelt to gather them with trembling fingers. Eli only glanced up from the saddle he was oiling and said, "Chickens will forgive you. They lay more tomorrow." She tried to mend a torn saddle blanket, her stitches crooked and clumsy. That evening she found the same blanket folded neatly outside her door, the edges redone with even lines, but the middle still bore her uneven thread. He had kept her work, only helped it along. There were moments she wanted to run. The shame clung to her tighter than dust. But each time, Eli's silence pulled her back. Not heavy, not demanding, just present. like the way he left water beside her door on the hottest days. Or how he sat on the porch with an extra cup of coffee, not asking, but waiting, just in case she wanted to join. One evening, after hauling wood to the barn, Luma sat in the field, watching the horses graze. She felt his steps before she heard them. He stopped a few feet away, not intruding. "You're learning," he said simply. She looked down at her dirt-streaked hands, then up at the sunset. "Feels like I ruin more than I fix." Eli didn't argue. He just knelt, picked up a stick, and drew a line in the dirt, then another crossing it. "It's not about perfect, just about trying again." They sat in silence as the light faded. The wind moved gently through the grass, and for the first time, Luma felt something stir in her chest, not fear, not shame, something softer, like a place she might belong to, not because she was good enough, but because she was trying. And someone saw it. It was the sound of laughter that pulled her from the kitchen, high-pitched, bright, the kind of sound the wind could not carry away. A child was on the porch, barefoot, with straw-colored hair and overalls too big for his frame. He had wandered from the neighbor's property down the hill, chasing a blue marble that now rolled between the porch slats. Eli stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "That's Micah," he said. "Jesse's boy. Comes by when he gets bored." Luma stood at the door, uncertain. Micah turned to her and grinned. "You live here?" She nodded once. He stepped closer, holding out a small pine cone like a gift. "Are you the mama here?" The word hung in the air. She froze. Micah tilted his head. "You look like one." She dropped to her knees without meaning to. Her hands trembled as she took the pine cone. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She wasn't anyone's mother. She had never been called that before. The boy didn't notice the silence. He smiled and ran off to chase the wind again, the marble long forgotten. But Luma sat there, on the porch steps, holding that pine cone like it was made of gold. Eli didn't speak. He only lowered himself beside her and waited. Her voice cracked when it finally came. "No one's ever thought of me that way." He didn't say, "You'd make a good one." He didn't offer empty comfort. He just said, "Micah sees things, most don't." She nodded, staring out over the hills. Her eyes burned, but she didn't wipe them. A piece of her had broken open, but not in pain. This time, it felt like something was letting go, something old and heavy that had lived inside her chest too long. The first seed of healing had been planted, and it came from the smallest hands. It happened 2 weeks after the rain, on a market day when Eli had taken Luma into town for supplies. She walked beside him, quiet but upright, a scarf tied around her hair, the gloves he had given her snug in one pocket. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. Folks stared, of course, but not like before. Some nodded. A few offered polite distance. The whispering had grown softer, with time. Then came the voice that pierced it all. "Well, I'll be damned if it isn't the little berry thief." Luma froze. Eli stopped too, his hand hovering near her shoulder without touching. A man stepped from the saloon doorway, broad, red-faced, belt pulled too tight over a stained shirt. His name was Grant Holloway, and Luma knew that voice in her bones. He had once lived near her ridge, had once tried to pull her behind a shed while drunk. She had bitten his hand to get away. "I heard someone saved you from a whipping," Grant sneered, stepping closer. "Didn't expect it to be Ward. You got his ears now too, girl." A few townspeople paused, sensing the shift in air. Eli said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Grant laughed, low and cruel. "You always were wild. But I guess even wild things know how to play tame when they want a warm bed." Luma's breath caught. The town was watching. The shame tried to rise, the old heat in her throat, the instinct to disappear. But she didn't run. Not this time. She stepped forward, past Eli. Her voice was clear, even. "You're the one who hides behind drink and dirt, Grant. You think speaking louder makes you bigger, but it only shows how small you've always been." The words came out like fire. A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to stop. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it. The power had shifted. Eli stepped beside her then, not in front of her, but beside her. His presence was like a wall that needed no bricks. The sheriff, who had heard enough, approached. "Keep moving, Holloway." Grant spat on the ground and walked away, his shadow smaller than when he came. Luma turned to Eli. Her chest was shaking, but her eyes were dry. "You didn't stop me," she whispered. "I didn't need to," he said. That moment was not loud. It didn't need to be. But something unspoken had settled between them. Not just protection, pride. The storm came fast, rolling down from the hills with a roar that shook windows and bent trees sideways. Luma had been in the pasture, checking on the mare that had gone into labor early. The sky had been blue that morning. No one expected the black wall of wind and rain that arrived by noon. Lightning cracked. The horses panicked. One of the colts broke loose, bolting toward the ridge where the land dropped sharply into the riverbed below. Luma didn't think. She just ran. Her boots slipped in the mud, wind pulling at her braid, but she didn't stop. She called to the colt in soft tones between gasps, her hands outstretched, eyes locked on the animal as it neared the cliff's edge. Eli saw her from the barn. He dropped the rope in his hands and took off, heart pounding. By the time he reached the ridge, Luma had gotten close enough to the colt to grab its reins, but the ground beneath her gave way. A shriek tore from her throat as her feet slipped, dragging both her and the colt toward the edge. Eli lunged. He grabbed her arm just in time, anchoring his feet in the wet soil, pulling with everything he had. She clutched the colt's reins in one hand and his wrist in the other, her eyes wild with fear, but not for herself. "Let the colt go," he shouted, but she shook her head. "It's scared." Together they heaved backward. Mud splattered, the colt stumbled, but they made it. All three collapsed into the grass, soaked and trembling. Eli turned to her, chest heaving. "You could have died." "So could he," she whispered, stroking the colt's neck. He stared at her, really stared. She wasn't just brave. She was loyal. And in that moment, he knew. This girl, this woman, was no longer just someone he'd helped. She was someone he would never let go of. The story of the rescue traveled faster than the storm that had caused it. By the end of the week, every porch in Dusthorn had murmured some version of it. How the native girl had chased a frightened colt through lightning, how she'd nearly fallen to her death, but refused to let go. They no longer called her the thief or that girl. Now they said her name. Luma. At the mercantile, Mrs. Fletcher, who once turned her back, placed a jar of preserves on the counter and slid it toward her. "For the cold nights," she said, eyes soft, words stiff but honest. At the church steps, a young boy tugged at her sleeve. "Are you the lady who saved the horse?" She smiled and nodded. He ran back to his mother, shouting, "I told you she's real." And on Sunday, when Eli brought her with him to town, something shifted. Men tipped their hats. Women offered polite smiles. Not much, but enough. The sheriff nodded as they passed. "Storm didn't scare you none, I hear." Luma met his eyes, steady. "It did. But fears never stopped me before." A quiet chuckle rippled through the men on the porch. One of them muttered, "She's tougher than she looks." Eli stood beside her, arms folded, silent as always, but proud. It was in the way he looked at her, as if she had always belonged beside him. She hadn't demanded their respect. She had earned it, not with words, but with courage and quiet grace. And Dusthorn at last had begun to see her not as something strange to be feared, but as someone worth standing beside. The evening air was cool, touched by the last breath of summer. The hills were quiet, the sky painted in soft strokes of lavender and gold. Luma sat on the porch, legs tucked beneath her, watching the lantern flicker beside the door. Eli stepped out of the barn, something wrapped in cloth held in both hands. He didn't speak right away, just sat beside her, close but not touching. The silence between them was full, not empty, like a field that had been sown and was waiting to bloom. He placed the bundle in her lap. "Made this," he said. "Took a while." She unwrapped the cloth gently. Inside was a small wooden carving, shaped like a bird with open wings. Not perfect, its feathers uneven, the wings slightly lopsided, but it was beautiful, in the way honest things are, simple, held together by care. Luma ran her fingers over the grain. "It's light." "It's hollow inside," Eli said, "so it don't sink when it falls." She looked at him. He wasn't staring, just watching her like a man who had waited a long time to say something that might still be too much. "I care for you, Luma," he said quietly, "not because you needed saving, but because you kept standing, even when you shouldn't have to." He paused, then added, "You don't owe me anything. I just... If you ever wanted to stay, not out of debt, but choice." Her eyes didn't fill with tears. Instead, they steadied, like water going still after a storm. She reached for his hand, not as permission, but answer. "I've always wanted a place that saw me," she whispered, "not as trouble, not as strange, just me." She held the bird to her chest, and beside the man who had offered her not safety but dignity, she stayed. By her own choosing. In the quiet hills beyond Dusthorn, a small house stood with smoke curling gently from its chimney. No grand banners marked what had changed there. No church bells rang, but something deeper had taken root, stronger than judgment, quieter than pride. Luma still wore the gloves, now mended and shaped to her hands. Eli still carved things with rough edges and soft meanings. And sometimes, when the evening was just right, they sat side by side on the porch without needing a single word between them. People in town no longer whispered. They nodded instead. Some even smiled. But the truth of their story was never told in full. Because it wasn't a tale of rescue or romance alone. It was a story of seeing someone, truly seeing them, and letting that be enough. No demands, no saving. Just a slow, steady choosing. Love, after all, does not shout. It does not beg to be noticed. It waits. It heals. And it stays. And sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that live the longest in the heart.